you're a superstar.
I am a superstar.
I usually don't go to the movies, but I'm glad I did because the Bob Marley movie was a 10 out of 10. I want to break this down from a licensed therapist perspective and talk about how Bob Marley had his own struggles with mental health. So you guys sit back, relax, and we're going to talk about it right now. So this is a little spoiler, but sometimes it's kind of hard to say it's a spoiler alert when it's a movie about somebody's actual life. And if you guys know Bob Marley, there really isn't no spoiler alert. You know what I mean? But I digress. There was a couple things I wanted to break down in this movie that Bob Marley struggled with. And when we talk about men's mental health, the first thing he struggled with was abandonment. Abandonment seemed like it was a huge, huge theme. And the abandonment came from not knowing who his father was. And it also came from his mother also abandoning him as well too. There was a lot of points in the movie where he had flashbacks and he was like, you know, envisioning like what his dad may look like. You know, there was some speculation about his dad being white and then, you know, his dad being like this Ethiopian ruler. And it was just a lot of different contexts, and he was really trying to find out who he was. And sometimes, you know, when we talk about abandonment issues, we also talk about what it may look like when we're trying to find our own identity, right? So this movie did a really great job when it came to speaking about Bob Marley's own identity crisis. So this is something also to take away as well. Like if you're having your own abandonment issues, you might have your own identity crisis as well too, because you know, the people who are supposed to be raising you, such as your mother and your father, if they are not in the picture, that can cause some discrepancies on like who you really are, right? Because where's the origin of you? You know, where's your other half? Who's the person that, you know, was responsible for bringing you into this world? You know what I mean? So with Bob Marley not knowing his father, such as, you know, many young black men or black men just in general, we typically don't know our father. So sometimes it's a big, huge identity crisis just within our own selves. You know what I mean? But despite all that, it was really good to see Bob Marley really trying to find himself and really stick true to who he was, which leads to my second point. Bob Marley was a really resilient individual. He really was one of those ones, like for real. His insight on resiliency was phenomenal in the movie. Now, there was a part of the movie where, you know, while he's trying to find himself, he was in Europe and like Paris, and like he wasn't in, you know, Jamaica. He had to, you know, for his own safety, he had to kind of flee a bit. And this is where we kind of see his musical career really take off. And during this time, you know, this was a huge time. If you guys don't know, like, you know, in the 70s, we had like Jimi Hendrix, you know, even the 70s, 60s, a lot of London bands. So a lot of music was coming out of Europe during this time, which, you know, really helped him in his music career. Now, him having the resiliency part goes to him actually going back to Jamaica and actually finishing what he started, right? I think another part when we talk about his resiliency is just in his faith to Rasta, his faith in Jah, which is God. You know what I mean? So he really stood on, you know, God being his foundation, and you know, that actually even led to his death. As you guys may or may not know, you know, Bob Marley, he passed away from cancer, and it was in his big toe. And this is something I knew for a while, but it was kind of interesting seeing it in the movie because, you know, the reason why, and the movie didn't really break this down too much, but if you do your studies on Bob Marley, you know, him and his, you know, his resiliency towards his, you know, Rasta and being Rastafarian, he didn't believe in, you know, cutting off limbs, like cutting off his toe. That's what, you know, he would have to have done in order for him to, you know, remain living. That's what the doctors were suggesting was, hey, you need to cut off your big toe, or, you know what I mean? Like there's a possibility that, you know, I guess it wasn't really a possibility, but, you know, he was going to die, right? But the possibility was it wouldn't spread if he cut off his big toe. So that was a big part of his resiliency. I really like the part where, you know, he really stood for God. And sometimes we, you know, we think about other religions and things of that nature, sometimes like Christianity being the only practiced religion. But in actuality, there's plenty of religions, you know what I mean? There's plenty of religions that stand on, you know, God as being the foundation. So it was really good seeing like his love for God, and me being a God-fearing person, that was really cool to see, him really standing on that. Some of the other traumas he dealt with was him being shot. There was a part in the movie where it displayed him getting shot, and again, that's before he went to Paris, and it was really interesting seeing like how that played into his psyche, right? Because Bob Marley was having flashbacks during the show. You know what I mean? Like he was having flashbacks of being shot. He was having flashbacks of people attacking him. He was having all these contemplating thoughts, which is, what we call today PTSD. You know what I mean? So even at that time, we didn't really have like that formal diagnosis unless like you're ex-military. But as we know now, trauma can come from not you just being in the military, but it is how you perceive the world after you have experienced a traumatic event. And this is just another side note, just because you experience trauma doesn't necessarily mean you have PTSD. So with Bob Marley, it looked like he was struggling with a bit of PTSD, especially having flashbacks, having those nightmares, and him actually having to get out of that environment, right? Because many times this is where we sometimes get PTSD kind of twisted is, it's called post-traumatic stress disorder, not current traumatic stress disorder. It's not called CTSD, it's called PTSD. And many times, we may be diagnosed with PTSD, but in actuality, how can we call it post-traumatic stress disorder when we're still experiencing the traumatic event? You know what I mean? So that's one part where when Bob Marley, he actually had to like get out of the situation and out of his environment in order to like trying to find some healing and focus on the music and, bring his family to safety, really go out there and elevate his career. You know what I mean? So sometimes like being in your environment, being in your actual environment is not conducive to your mental health. Being in your environment can actually hinder you from your healing process. And this is something that we also have to be mindful as well too, because many times we talk about, oh, we're healing and I'm going to heal and I'm going to, become a better person and I'm in my healing journey. But you're doing the same exact things and you're in the same exact position in the same exact environment. It's going to be really hard for you to actually heal. It's going to be really hard for you to actually heal because you're in the same environment, experiencing the same things. You feel what I'm saying? So that was one thing when I saw this and I was like, dang, that's pretty dope that Bob Marley, he actually had the privilege to actually, get up and, go out to Europe and actually expand his career. Him being in Jamaica not only compromised his safety, but it also compromised him from becoming who he intended to be. The additional part I wanted to break down was him actually experiencing police brutality as well too. You know what I mean? So sometimes we think about police brutality just as a American thing. And it's really, when you think about police systems and, the origin of policing, it is really not really rooted in, developing community. You know what I mean? Now, law enforcement is important. Law enforcement is something that, we sometimes depend on as a society, but sometimes we often think about, white cops killing black folks. You know what I mean? It was interesting to see that in One Love, it was interesting to see in the movie that, the cops that were harassing him were actually folks that look like him as well too. You know what I mean? So like sometimes, this is why I always kind of break down it's not always, I'm not saying it doesn't exist, but it's not always white cop, black people. You know what I mean? Like, and I just think that may come from my own bias as well too, because, anytime I was harassed by the police, it wasn't by a white cop. The first time I was harassed was by a black cop sitting in front of my own home. You feel me? So like, that may be my own bias. I know that's not everybody's experience, but even seeing this movie, I was like, it's an infrastructure thing. You know what I mean? This movie really displayed as more of an infrastructure thing than like a, black cop, than a black and white thing. You know what I mean? So the infrastructure with policing, especially it not being American, you can kind of see him being in London, where there were white cops harassing him, you know what I mean? But also in Jamaica where, there are black cops that are harassing him as well too. You know what I mean? So it was really interesting that they put this in this movie and how they showed how even then, it doesn't have to be in the United States of America, but it can be anywhere in the world. Police do harass folks. The last part I wanted to break down just a bit was just his relationship with his girl. You know what I mean? It was a beautiful relationship. It was a rocky relationship, But I really like the way they kind of didn't put too much emphasis on like infidelity, but because it sounded like there was some infidelity and like, you know, other children were born outside of, you know, their union. But I really like how the family, because the family was involved, they didn't really focus on that. You know what I mean? There's a lot of other movies where, you know, the Martin Luther King movie, the Selma movie, where the emphasis was like, okay, Martin Luther King was like a cheater. You know what I mean? And sometimes that clouts you out just from the actual message of who the person was. You know what I mean? Not saying that, you know, I'm validating cheating or like it's okay or anything like that. Not by any means. But I feel like, you know, them kind of sprinkling it in there and kind of like showing it without showing it was helpful, because you didn't really focus on Bob Marley like being that type of person. And again, we don't really know, you know, what that really was. It was kind of like said but not said type of thing. You know what I mean? So I'm glad that the movie really depicted him as the man who he was and what he stood for, instead of focusing on like his faults. You know what I mean? Especially when we talk about these black films, like black men in films, like it is all bad sometimes. It is all bad. And that sometimes that's the way Hollywood depicts us. It's not a good look all the time. You know what I mean? It's not a good look to always look like the hero, but also the villain. You feel what I'm saying? So I'm glad that they're able to conceptualize his life without like throwing out all the bad stuff about him. You know what I mean? I appreciate y'all tapping in. Again, my name is Terrence, Stewart, licensed therapist. Let me know what you guys think about the movie. You guys seen the movie? If you guys want to share some of your guys' thoughts as well too, I appreciate y'all tapping in. Until next time, y'all take care. Peace.